here. O's.
I was like, oh my God, how did I miss that? How did I miss that piece? And then, well, you know what I did? I convinced myself that it was a necklace.
Well, I was originally born in Boston, 1961. Living in Boston, I was one of the first of 7 kids in a voluntary busing program. And they basically took 7 of us from the inner city and basically shipped us out into one of the more affluent neighborhoods in Massachusetts and exposed us to a world that we probably would not have seen had it not been for this program. I knew it was very different, for me, because I was one of 7 black kids in the entire school. And then I'd go back home and I was surrounded by my community, which was obviously all black. And when we moved to Bellingham, Massachusetts, we were the first black family on the street. It was an interesting time because I was very used to being around, white kids and being in that environment. And so for me, it was not particularly different. But for the people in that neighborhood, it was tremendously different. I'll never forget, there was a time when I was riding my bike in front of this woman's house, and she basically told me not to ride my bike in front of her house. And I didn't think twice about it. And my dad came home and said to me, so, how was your day? We'd always kind of do a little wrap up. And I said, oh, well, I think I've probably got in trouble. And he goes, what happened? And I told him, and he looked at me. It was the first time I really remember seeing my dad upset, and he grabbed me and my bike and went down to the neighbor's house and said, if you ever tell my son never to ride in front of your house again, I'll make sure he rides in your house. And I remember years later finding out that there was a petition to get our parents kicked out of their own house. It was crazy. It was unbelievable. They were 19 and 20 when they had me. So, they grew up 50s and the 60s, so they were very much flower children and understood how the world and society was changing, and I think that instilled a lot of how I look at the world today. I ultimately ended up going to a private school in Rhode Island, graduated there, and then went to Babson College in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and then moved to New York, where the world opened up. It was amazing. Just started, my first actual job out of school was working at Pepsi. And it was an amazing experience. The people there were great. I wasn't really out. I was in New York at the time of the AIDS crisis too, so the environment was different, how you kind of approached the world was different, and certainly how the world approached you. Just started seeing a guy who we just celebrated our 30th anniversary in August, actually. I just finally got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't pretend that I was engaged in a relationship that was not real, was not honest. I remember my mom saying to me, and we were talking about insurance, and we were talking about how some companies now were starting to insure, gay families, and my mom looked at me and she said, well, are you going to do that? And you're going to make sure that that's going to happen with you and Andrew? And I went, okay, this is it. She wants to talk about it. And it was beautiful. It was unbelievable. It was so easy. And I know that's not the case for a lot of people. But I had parents who were just concerned about making sure that I was happy. I was bringing my whole complete self to work. I was bringing my whole complete self to my friends. And they understood what that meant and why that was important. And it made me a more creative person. It made me understand the world in a way that I was probably blocking it off in the past. They told me on a Tuesday that, hey, we want you to go out and go on the road with Michael. And I thought, oh, okay, that's going to change my life. And I flew out. I went to Universal Studios, which is where Michael was doing his rehearsal. And his rehearsals were massive. It wasn't just, we're going to go into a small little room and rehearse. It was the entire production. I was on the road with Michael for the first Bad tour. I think we were out for about a year and a half. And they couldn't hold my job for me with Pepsi anymore because the advertising job needed to be filled. So I convinced them to put me on retainer. And that was the first start of my company. My first sponsorship outside of Pepsi was putting together Whitney Houston with AT&T for their True Voice campaign. As a gay man, it's really interesting. You know, I have two business partners, Corey Isaacson and Magic Johnson, who are both spectacular, you know, human beings. And it never even occurred to me that it might be an issue, and obviously it wasn't with them. And I think part of why it hasn't been an issue, and certainly I've been in situations in corporate America where you've heard things that were inappropriate, where particularly given, you know, the time that I was coming out in, you know, the early 80s, and again, it was a very different time. People weren't as enlightened, I would say, as they are today, and there are still people that need to be more enlightened, but I never was gonna let it get in my way. There's this great civil rights leader, Bayard Rustin, who I read about, and I always thought, oh my gosh, this man is so spectacular. And he said something that, one of his quotes was that what every community needs is a group of angelic troublemakers. And I always thought, okay, I get what that means. We'd always hoped that it would get to the point where it would be legal, not just for that emotional reason, but there were a lot of legal reasons why it needed to be legal. And there are things that, as a business owner, that I would not be able to do for Andrew if something, God forbid, happened to me. And so we had always hoped and fought and did everything we could to encourage our legislators to pass the law. We happened to be in our condo in Maui when it became legal. And we were at the end of our vacation, and we said, you know what, let's tack on a couple of extra days and basically get married. And so we did. And it was lovely. And I will tell you, it changes things. When you have that piece of paper that says you do have the same rights as, you know, heterosexual community, you do feel a little bit different. You feel a little bit more empowered. There is something that just makes this feel more permanent. To this day, you know, we kind of laugh at it because our families, Andrew's family, my family, you can't even imagine not being together. You can't imagine a world where that would have been an issue. And I remember my grandmother happened to be a chef, and she was an amazing chef. And, you know, she was a chef from the South, so everything had a lot of butter and sugar, and it just tasted amazing. No matter what, it just tasted great. But she knew, ironically, that these recipes that she hand wrote on index cards for us, and she knew that, quite frankly, we were horrible cooks. My family was not going to be able to kind of deliver on the same level that she could as a chef. And when she died, she left them to my husband. And I thought to myself, wow, every once in a while he'll just pull out one of those recipes and cook from that index card that she left. But I'm really hopeful because the allies, it's people who have a conscience, people who understand the power of being together and supporting one another, and how we've got to evolve as a society and be more inclusive and more understanding and more accepting. And so I focus on those people, and those are the people that I look at and think, you know what, there are a lot more of those people out there than there aren't, and that's what I'm holding on to.